things, not necessarily a thing a day, but over that time I want to see if we can accomplish 3 things. One, very simply and quickly, we'll get that aspect done quickly. I want to talk about how to approach this kind of a thing. And I know you guys, you know how to write. You've been reading your stuff, by the way. Your papers are good, just not done yet. Are you headed somewhere?
Yes, sir.
Fine, just close the door. But I want to talk about how I go about doing this kind of research and writing. Simply just to offer it up as a model, as some tips and things that you might consider. Then throughout this, I want to look at how do scholars approach this particular question or related questions, and then a little bit of engagement in the actual question of, is this passage Virgilian? Does it belong in the Aeneid? So you remember the deal was that those lines are considered possibly spurious. And we're talking about book 2, lines, should remember by now, 568 to 588. So 20 lines toward the end of book 2. You don't need your text because you're going to have a copy of it here in just a second. So first I want to start off with how I approached it. My first thing to do was to go to JSTOR. So I go to JSTOR and I search for, I don't remember what my first search was, but it probably was like Helen, Aeneid, or something like that. And got my first hit and got my first article. And from there, I think I probably got about 2 or 3 articles. And then those articles had bibliography, referencing other articles, and so there were multiple trips back to JSTOR. And pretty soon it turned into this, full of articles on this particular issue. And these articles stretch back to, the earliest is 1906. Okay, so we're talking about just a little over 100 years worth of scholarship. The issue itself has been out there longer than that, but in terms of scholarship, kind of we'd say really the modern era, about 100 years worth of stuff. Okay, so that's what I did. And the way I do stuff, I like to punch holes and put little tabs to separate my articles, because that's the way I like to do it. And I put them in chronological order, because that's the way I like to do it. And the only reason these aren't in there is because I didn't have a bigger binder. I filled up the 1-inch spine, I didn't have a bigger one, so I just had to stick these in the front.
I can get you a bigger binder.
Well,
I have extras at home.
I appreciate that. At this point, I'm done now. So, and so when I read, I highlight. I'm a highlighter, and so I go through and I'm highlighting anything that I think is really significant and germane to the topic. And then I'm also a margin note kind of person, and I may not find this quickly because I quickly moved over to the computer in taking my notes, but I was putting post-it notes with my margin notes in the side. And my initial margin notes are dialogue, almost with the author of the article. This is stupid, okay? Comments like that. Or see such and such else, this is obviously ridiculous. And so there's very, very direct conversational kind of stuff, okay? Then my next step, after I'd read through everything, and I resisted the next step until I was sure that I had read through everything. The next step for me was to type up all of the highlights. So I went through and I typed up all the highlights, and actually that's some other stuff there. But all right, so the highlights started right here. So for me, just the author's name, Fairclough, and bullet points, and here are all the highlights that I had made. And in this first pass through, my personal comments, I simply threw in blue. Okay, so these would have been the post-it note comments that I had made on the side. Like, here I've got a note, there's an assumption that characters act with consistency throughout a work unless a clear cause is given for them to act otherwise. That was a comment I had made. And other personal stuff there. So that was in blue. And so I've got everything typed up. All right, and then this one I put in red just because it was a really good quotation that I personally loved, and that was something just for me. Okay. Then, after going through that, my issue was, okay, so how do I pull all this stuff together? And I'm thinking about it for two levels, not only for publication, but for really, first and foremost, for you guys. How do I pull all the different approaches that scholars have gone, and how do I pull all this stuff together? So I start with an outline. I kind of outline some stuff, and I kind of see what are the big questions here, and then I go, okay, so I think these are all the big questions. And then, what I love about computers these days is the color coding. And you've known that from the way I do notes in class. So all these issues, I start color coding and bold facing or doing funky things with the fonts. And then any text that I'd highlighted that fit that area, I color coded the same way. So there's issues about the credibility of Servius. That's in red, normal font. Then there's a teal font. There's, for something else, content analysis is in green, lexical analysis is in orange, stylistical analysis is in purple. So all the different big areas, I start to sift that out, and then I come through, and again with all the, that's just other stuff there. Then with all my highlighted stuff, I go back and color code. And I say, okay, now who was actually talking about content? And I go back and I color code all that stuff according to the little legend I'd set up. And who was talking about something else. And so now I've got it all grouped by color, and then I start bringing it all together into how I want to write. So I throw that out there just as a starter, and that's really all I want to say about that. But that's how I work. And everybody works differently. Some people like to use little note cards and whatever else, but that's how I do it. Okay, so from there, I want to move into, and this will probably take us the remainder of our time. Let me think about it for a minute. Yeah, you do. Now, chances are, by the time this gets published, I don't know if you'll still be in school or not. The way academic journals work, they're often very slow, and it can be as much as a year.
You can just go get
So, it's submitted, and we'll see. Thank you.
Is that from a mini clip game?
This is.
This? I'm gonna say Happy Ninja Day, since
Oh.
today is Ninja Day.
Since you're drawing a ninja, no, because it looks like a mini clip game that you
Yeah, I think
Okay.
that's what I based it off of, I'm not sure.
Remind me, one of you, at the end of class, to me to make a copy of something funny for you tomorrow. I'll give it to you tomorrow. I can't make it right now.
You could watch the video.
I'm not going to watch it. I'm not going to watch it. Remind me, though, to make a copy of a funny thing about a scholar writing a sentence. Somebody remind me at the end of the period. Okay, so here we go. And we are just going to kind of work through this piece. The text is here laid out for you as it would be in the Oxford text, and that's an important statement because the text itself of these 20 lines is in somewhat of dispute. Now, if you don't want to keep flipping back and forth, you can always whip out your book. It is 2 lines 568 to 588, so if you don't want to flip back and forth, you can do that. And you will need to reference the text, okay?
Book 2, yeah.
Book 2, lines 568 to 588, so whichever, or rip the first page off or whatever you want to do there. Okay. All right, so these lines have been fraught with controversy since at least the 5th century, when Servius wrote that they had been removed from Virgil's text by his literary executors Varius and Tucca. Now, those names are going to get explained coming up here in the next paragraph, and as we go through this, Other things that I go off on, that's why I said, yeah, you can go and write on this if you want to take notes on it. You can. We'll explain who Servius, Varius, and Tuca are. Questions of their authorship, meaning these lines, and placement in the text have exercised modern philologists from the 1800s to the present. And it can reasonably be said that the problems surrounding these lines have not and never will be solved. As Austin wrote, these lines form an exasperating tumulplatz for students of Virgil. Tumulplatz is German for basically a stomping ground or an area of being, exercising and so forth. He goes on to quote Wichmann from 1876, who wrote, and remember I put this quotation up on the board for you before, Quade re viri docti jam pridem inter se certarunt, semperque ni fallor certabunt. I don't know if you remember that from before, but concerning qua re, what would that mean?
These things.
Concerning this thing, viri docti,
Men.
what kind of men? Docti men. Learned men, very good, Rachel. Learned men, jam pridem is for a long time, have for a long time certarunt or certaverunt, syncopated, is the verb form of certamen. Close. Certamen is a contest. So they have contested, they have argued inter se, among themselves, and, says Wichmann, ni fallor, unless I am fallor, unless I'm mistaken, unless I'm deceived, they semper certabunt.
Always will.
They always will. This is not going to get solved. I'm certainly convinced that no one's ever going to be convinced of anything regarding this. Although claiming to have the answer to the questions surrounding this passage, Gould admits that the road which leads from the enunciation of the thesis to the final QED of the proof, and we talked about what QED means.
Yeah.
It's what you used to put in the last line of a mathematical proof.
Like thus it is so or something?
Yeah. All mathematical proofs ended with the abbreviation QED, quod erat demonstrandum. Got a nice passive paraphrastic there. That which was to be proved. So hopefully the last line of your mathematical proof is the same line, same as the first line. So you're going to start out to show that these two angles are congruent, or something like this. And then the last line should indicate that these angles are indeed congruent, quod erat demonstrandum. So he says, the road which leads from the enunciation of the thesis, in other words, the beginning of all this to the final proof, is long and winding, typical less of the unswerving advance of a Euclidean theorem than of the anfractuousness of a drunkard's homeward path. That is just, has become a new favorite word, anfractuous. That's why I included it in the title of my article, included it in the title of what we're doing for the next 3 days over there on the board, Helen's Anfractuous Journey. I just love it. The other thing is, and this will make the piece I give you tomorrow even funnier. Honestly, scholars are so full of themselves and full of it. They are. They're an insufferable lot. Some of them are simply an insufferable lot. You want to talk about arrogance and pride. In all honesty, I'm not entirely sure, for example, in Austin's quote, I'm not sure exactly the tumulplatz. You needed to use tumulplatz. Why couldn't you just said forms an exasperating stomping ground for students? I don't know, because tumulplatz sounds more highfalutin. He quotes from German. Anfractuousness of the drunkard's homeward path. But it makes scholarship fun to read. And certainly the way these guys sometimes savage each other. The purpose of the present paper is not so much to attempt a solution, but rather to outline the arguments and approaches to the question. So what this article is to take a look and say, how have scholars laid this out over the last 100 years? And perhaps to engage in a bit of Wichmann's Certamen. Okay, so a little bit of the wrestling, a little bit of I'll get into that a little bit. In so doing, it is hoped the secondary teacher, especially advanced placement syllabus, may find a way to introduce to students the methods used to establish the text they study. And that is really the principal reason why I wrote this. It's entirely why I wrote it, and why we're spending 3 days talking about it. Is so that you guys have, because we've stumbled upon it, we've discussed this, have a little bit of a deeper understanding of how this thing, this actual particular book, comes into existence. Marcus, you might want to slap yourself in the face. Let's begin with some background. In the 1969 Oxford text. Okay, so the basic text, we've talked about this before. Oxford, Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, these kinds of schools, they're the standards for stuff. And Oxford University Press is a standard publisher of classical texts, Greek and Latin. There are some other publishers. There's a German publisher named Teubner and a French publisher whose name I can't remember. The Oxford text of Virgil is the standard text. This is what we all have agreed on is pretty much it. And in that 1969 Oxford text, which was edited by a guy named R.A.B. Miners, this passage is bracketed. And the Apparatus Criticus notes the following. Now, we've talked about that before. Again, just open any page. You see little stuff at the bottom of the page. It's called the Apparatus Criticus, the critical apparatus. And what that is, it shows you the variant readings. Okay? It shows you the variant readings. Manuscript A had this word, manuscript B had that word, and I've decided to go with manuscript C, which has another word. Okay? Because the thing to always remember with all this stuff, we do not have any autographs of any of the stuff from the ancient world. By autographs, we don't mean signatures, we mean stuff that was written by the author's own hand. Okay? So we don't have any of Virgil's stuff. All we have are copies of copies of copies. And the earliest copy might be several hundred years after Virgil or Caesar or Cicero or somebody lived. And so you know how it is when you're copying notes on somebody else or you're trying to cheat off somebody on a test. You might misunderstand their handwriting. Or you might just look at it wrong. And next thing you know, you've got it wrong, and then the person cheating off of you makes even more mistakes, and so we go on from there. And he says in the Apparatus Criticus, the notes that talk about that, he says, roughly here, he says, these verses, which have been testified to by Servius, and we're going to talk about who that is, in his Life of Virgil, it's agreed have been omitted, indeed, by Tucca and Varius. And then there's some other references to some other manuscripts there. And there are very few manuscripts that actually contain this, he says. Inter Virgilianos per pauci, very few actually contain this. Upon Virgil's death, Augustus assigned the task of preparing the Aeneid for publication to Virgil's friends Varius and Tucca. Okay, now this is important background. So we know that Virgil died before the thing was finished. Augustus said, somebody's got to finish this up. He gave it to two friends, Varius and Tucca. Varius is sometimes listed alone because he is definitely the primary editor. Okay? He's the main guy. And these are people who knew Virgil, people who were poets in their own right and were able to kind of polish it up, and let's get this thing to press. We know this from the 5th century scholiast Servius. Okay? So Virgil writes 1st century. Now we're down to 5th century AD. In 5th century AD, we got this guy named Servius, who says, Augustus Vero ne tantum opus periret, tucum et varium hoc lege usit emendare. Augustus indeed, and we've got a negative what kind of clause here? Ne tantum opus periret. Got a negative what here? What kind of clause is ne through periret? Bottom of page 3. Nay. Negative purpose clause, right? Augustus, indeed. So that such a great work might not perish, tucum et varium hoc lege usit emendare, ordered Tucca and Varius by law to emendare, to amend it, right? To get it ready for publication. Ut superflua demerent nihil aderent tamen, so that they might take away anything that was over and above, superflua, we get the word superfluous, but so that they might nihil aderens, they might add nothing. So we don't believe that any of this is not Virgil. I mean, we believe it's Virgil. We don't believe that Tucca and Varius added stuff, but they might have taken away a few things that were that they thought were not Virgilian, or that Virgil himself may have indicated to them that he didn't want in the final draft and never had a chance to edit himself. We know all this from this guy Servius. It should be noted that anyone who studies the textual tradition of Virgil will soon become involved in Servian scholarship and investigation of the two traditions of Servius and Servius Auctus, also called Servius Danielus. Young guy like that. For the purposes of this paper, we'll refer to all Servian texts with a single name of Servius. Now, I spared everybody another 75 pages of digression. Whoa. Just as we got multiple versions of Virgil, we got multiple versions of Servius who wrote about Virgil. And so then scholars have sometimes said, well, forget Virgil, let's just deal with Servius. And what do we know that he wrote? And one manuscript of Servius says this about Virgil. Another manuscript of Servius says that about Virgil. And so before we can figure out anything about Virgil, we got to figure out the truth about Servius. So you immediately start to see how layered this becomes, okay?
Are there any spurious things related to Servius?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. But we're just going to lump all the Servian scholarship together and just kind of, for the sake of this paper, refer to it just by Servius. Servius then speaks of two passages to illustrate the kind of work that Varius and Tucca were supposed to do. Okay? So as Servius is telling the story of how the Aeneid came to be, he says Varius and Tucca edited this thing for publication. They didn't add anything, but they did take some stuff away. For example, and Servius gives two examples. First is a passage we've come to refer to as Illego Qui, and runs thus. Okay? Now, just a quick reference about the Illego Qui lines. What is the opening of the Aeneid? Anybody in Latin?
Arma virumque cano Troia.
Arma virumque cano Troia, right? However, there is a manuscript tradition that has 4 lines before that.
What?
These 4 lines.
Can you explain that again? Sorry.
There is a manuscript tradition that says the Aeneid did not begin with I sing of arms and a man. The first from the shores of Troy, driven by fate. There's a manuscript tradition that says there were 4 lines before that, and that the 4 lines were these. And these 4 lines roughly say, I am that guy who, oh, there's a typo there, modulatus, it should have been, autocorrect got me there, who once sang on a song on a slender reed about stuff from the countryside and shepherds, works that were pleasing to farmers, at nunc horrentia Martis, and now of Mars the bristling arma virumque cano, the bristling weapons I sing. Servius says that Varius and Tucca omitted those 4 lines. And most modern scholars indeed agree that Virgil probably did not write those lines. That those lines had somehow crept in, that Virgil never would have said something like that. To start off with, basically, from the producers who brought you the Avengers, now comes this new blockbuster movie. That's really what those 4 lines are. From the poet who brought you the Eclogues, poems about shepherds, and the Georgics, poems about farmers, now comes his new work, the Aeneid. Okay? And most scholars feel that those lines are bogus. Okay? And Servius says, yeah, they did omit those lines. The second passage that Servius says they omitted has come to be referred to as the Helen episode, here after H.E., and runs into Miner's Oxford edition as cited above. So right away, our passage that's in question has been cited along with this other passage as 2 examples of stuff that Virgil's editors cut out. According to Servius, in his commentary on Book 2.592, Varius and Tucca deleted this passage for 2 reasons. He says they deleted it. Nam et turpe est viro forti contra feminam erasci, et contrarium est Helenam in domo priami fuisse illi rei quae in sexto dicitur, quia in domo est inventa Deiphobi postquam ex summa arche vocaverit Graecos. Now, this is worth unpacking. Servius says that Varius and Tuca omitted this passage for two reasons. The first, it is turpe, it is shameful for a viro forti, for a strong man, irasci contra feminam, to be angered against a woman. Remember the Helen episode? Aeneas is on the walls. It's the final night of Troy. He has just seen Priam murdered. He's thinking about going back to his own house, rescuing his own family. He turns and down in the courtyard he spies Helen. And remember his thinking at the time. He's like, there is the cause of all this. I could kill her right now. I could kill her right now. And even though I wouldn't get any glory for it, because there's no glory in killing a woman, by God, I would avenge what's happened to my city and my people. And Servius says that Varius and Tuca omitted the passage because that wouldn't be very nice to have Aeneas think and act that way. That wouldn't be consistent with the character of Aeneas. And it is contrary to the fact that Helen was in the house of Priam when it is said in book 6, Quae in sexto dicitur, that she was actually in the house of Deiphobus. Another problem with the Helen episode is that it has Helen in the palace of Priam. And if you go over in book 6, in a part that we're not reading, there's reference to her on the last night of Troy in the house of Deiphobus. And that Helen actually was the one who opened the gates and let the Greeks in. Now that is indeed an inconsistency between book 2 and book 6. It's going to be in two places at once.
What's the rumor?
Questions arise about this passage because there is no reference to the HE prior to Servius in the 5th century, and the credibility of Servius has been called into question. Now, here's the deal. If this had actually been written by Virgil, don't you think somebody would have said something about this before the 5th century, 500 years later? Wouldn't there be some other reference to it? And some people think that Servius was full of it. Austin, while accepting Virgilian authorship, nevertheless refutes Servius's grounds for deletion. So Austin, this author, and you got the full bibliography in the back, you can see who Austin is. Austin says, yeah, Virgil did write this. But it wasn't cut out for the reasons that Servius says it was. Okay? He says, Servius's grounds for the deletion are worthless. I told you these guys can be a little rough. The first reason, i.e. that it is unbecoming of a hero to have such anger against a woman, is a patent paraphrase of lines 583 to 584 and does not merit serious consideration. In the Helen episode itself, Aeneas says, I'm not going to get any glory for killing a woman. And Austin says, well, Servius is just rewriting what was in the passage itself, that it's not honorable to kill a woman. So really that's not any objection. And the second reason that it's inconsistent with book 6, he says, Virgil was not so woolly-minded that he could not see the contradiction with book 6, lines 5, 11, and following, nor so pedantic to think that it mattered. If Varius and Tuca removed the lines, they cannot have done it for the reasons given by Servius. So we got some questions about Servius. Now Servius is also discredited by modern scholars because he did not cite his sources. Holy mackerel, I think you'd get docked on a paper if you don't cite your sources. All the stuff in the last election about fact-checking, okay? We are a fact-obsessed culture, all right? We want the footnotes. Servius didn't do that. Servius doesn't say where he got those 4 lines or where he got the Helen episode. He just says they were there and these two guys cut them out. Now, how does Servius know 500 years later? He doesn't say how he knows. Donatus, however, who's another ancient source, also referenced the Illego lines, but attributed his source to a 1st century grammarian named Nisus. Now follow this along. Servius cites both the Illego lines and the HE, but lists no source for either. Okay? So we got two guys from about the same time. Donatus and Servius. Both were writing about the 5th century. Donatus quotes the Illego lines. Servius quotes the Illego lines. Donatus says where he got them. He says, now I heard from so-and-so that these lines were part of Virgil and they were cut out. Servius just says these lines were cut out. He doesn't say who told him or where he got it. As a result, Gould and Murgia dismiss him as unreliable. Writes Gould, no teacher who habitually censors and even doctors the information he purveys can be set up as a tribunal to whom a final appeal can be made. We cannot take his words at face value. So some modern scholars say Servius is so full of it because he didn't include a bibliography, we can't trust him on anything. Now, where are you on bibliographies? When you read a book, do you look for a bibliography?
No.
Should.
Depends on the book.
For a nonfiction book, you should.
I read nonfiction books.
Okay. If you're looking at nonfiction, or if you're using it for research or something, you should look for a bibliography. Who is this author citing and quoting? And if the person doesn't have any bibliography, you got to think, well, where are they getting their stuff? They're just making it up out of thin air. Okay. Now, here's the thing: just because a person doesn't have a bibliography, though, does that necessarily mean they're lying?
No.
No. And it's 5th century. Not everybody. Now, they go, well, he could have done it because Donatus did. Okay, well, maybe Donatus was a better student than I don't know. But I don't know that that necessarily means that Servius lied. But some people think so. Murgia agrees, and focusing on the fact that the HE is linked with the Illego lines, pronounces them spurious on the grounds that they are, quote, in bad company. Okay? Everybody agrees that the Illego lines are bogus. Okay? Now, since Servius quoted the HE along with these spurious lines, and we know good and well that Virgil didn't write those, people say, well, maybe the HE Virgil didn't write either. Guilt by association. Okay? Horsfall is the most damning. After noting references in Quintilian and Gellius, these are other ancient authors, to ancient manuscripts of Virgil, he makes the sweeping statement: we should not imagine that Roman scholars 150 years after Virgil's death were honest and competent paleographers, able to date manuscripts by proper and balanced criteria. Now, I tried to avoid as much personal comment as I could in this article, but I'll certainly speak to it. There is a trainload of arrogance among modern people, and not just scholars, but certainly among scholars, that assumes that ancient people either were stupid or liars. And I'm sick of it. Personally, I think it keeps these people having a job. All right, we assume that ancient people are stupid and they're liars, and therefore we can go and write articles about stuff and keep our own jobs. Yet research and evidence over and over and over again keeps proving this or that thing from the ancient world. I'm going, okay, maybe they don't have the tools that we have. Maybe they don't have the perspectives and the approaches we have. It doesn't mean they were stupid and liars.
Wasn't it a few years ago you showed us like that somebody found like what's essentially like a Roman Swiss Army knife?
I think so, something like that. We found evidence of the 8 people from Asia Minor must have settled Italy, just as the tradition indicates, because we found cattle in central Italy with DNA markers that are only present in cattle from Asia Minor. They're not present in any other cattle. And so once again, hey, story must be true. Okay? Now, not that we're saying, that all the gods and goddesses stuff, but a lot of the basic stuff is true. But Horsfall says, no, we can't believe these people. And turning his attention specifically to Servius, he writes, it should have been generally recognized long ago that Servius is not a scrupulous and reliable source. It has long been clear that a note in Servius about the posthumous editing of the Aeneid serves not to guarantee, but rather to cast doubt upon the details of the HE and its alleged preservation. Let us be quite clear. The HE is of the highest quality, but its textual credentials are deplorable, and Servius's credibility in such matters is negligible. Obviously, Horsfall thinks that the HE was not written by Virgil and should not be included in the manuscript. Now, the entire puzzle surrounding the HE hinges on the credibility of Servius. The most savage criticism, however, seems designed to convince by bluster. It is the mark of civilized jurisprudence that a person is considered innocent until proven guilty. At least that's what I thought. I thought you were innocent until proven guilty. The contemporary view of Servius has pronounced sentence before the defendant has even ascended the dock. It may be practiced to discredit the prostitute who testifies in a murder trial, but a life of crime does not necessarily entail that the person is lying. Okay, so you don't like Servius. It doesn't mean that what he said was false. And most of the stuff that discredited Servius that I could read seemed to be designed to convince by bluster. Let's just throw out big sweeping statements and talk about how discreditable Servius is, and therefore he is not worthy to be believed. Okay, well, really, why? An inside source? I'm not convinced. Now, the whole thing still may be bogus, but I'm not convinced that it is for that reason. Yeah.
What does bluster mean?
Just big, kind of blowhard speech, just blathering on and on. I mean, honestly,
Basically,
if you wrote something, if you look at that quote on page 5, if you look at that quote on page 5 from Horsfall, if you wrote something like that in a paper, your English teacher would tear you up for it because they would say it's too personal. You got too personal in a formal piece of writing. And he's going on and on about, Servius is not scrupulous, he's unreliable, but they're not competent, blah, blah, blah. That's ridiculous. Back to page 6. Nonetheless, much analysis to prove or disprove Virgilian authorship of the HE has ensued. The analysis has focused on, and this is the key paragraph that's now going to form the outline for the rest of the article, narrative analysis. In other words, does the HE fit within the overall design of the Aeneid? Some scholars have tried to look at it from that perspective and said, okay, let's look at this and say, does this fit? Okay? And if the HE, for example, had contained